It seems odd when you look at the lectionary readings during Advent that the bulk of those readings are predictive of some sort of judgment that's coming, when this is a season of hope and anticipation and joy. But that's the type of judgment that God brings, is the kind that reverses the misfortunes of the world and deals with the corruption and the hypocrisy and the abuse and the exploitation and all of those things, and reverses the misfortunes of those who are oppressed. And so if you're looking at the lectionary and you're reading and you're like, wow, this just doesn't seem to make sense with the season that we're in, I've been there too. I've wrestled with it as well. I'm like, why can't they talk about, peace and goodwill and all this other kind of stuff? But that is the means in which peace is brought. God deals with the things that defaces and dehumanizes creation. We're in Matthew chapter 24, verse 36 through 44, and this will be a short one. This is one of my favorite times of the year here at Ozark, and I'll miss it. I'll miss it when we go. But about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark, and they knew nothing of the flood, and they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. So too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two will be in the field, one will be taken and one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together, one will be taken and one left. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have left his house be broken into. Therefore you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. I want to talk about staying awake. Staying awake, one of the hardest things to do in church, I'm told. I've been putting people to sleep for about 30 years or close to it. But most of the days that change our lives come without announcing themselves. Everything starts out as an ordinary day until the phone rings, and then you discover that there's an emergency and something terrible has happened, or you're at the doctor's office and they have to clear their throat before they tell you what has the results of your tests. Or a headline flashes across the screen, or what turned out to be an ordinary Tuesday now becomes a dividing line between before and after. Right? And Jesus says his coming here, God's reckoning with the world, is going to arrive just like that. Not on a date that is circled by all the prophecy gurus and experts, not after a countdown clock reaches zeros, but in the middle of everyday life, an ordinary day. People eating, drinking, marrying, buying, selling, completely unaware that history is about to turn a corner. Matthew 24, 36 through 44 is Jesus' wake-up call to a people that have been lulled asleep by the hum of everyday life. It's a call to stay awake in a culture that has lost its ability to discern the times in which they're living in. And this paragraph sits in a larger body of teaching known as the Olivet Discourse, Matthew 24 and 25. And if you zoom out a little bit and go back to the 23rd chapter, Jesus spent a little bit of time in that chapter denouncing the hypocrisy of the scribes and the Pharisees. They were outwardly righteous, but inwardly corrupt. They lacked humility. They lacked a sense of justice and mercy and fidelity. They were called blind guides who kept the people from the kingdom and perpetuated this generational hardness towards God's prophets. And then in Matthew chapter 24, Jesus predicts the destruction of the temple, the heart of Jewish identity and worship. And then he calls his disciples to persevere amidst the coming difficulties, the tribulation. He warns them of false Christs who would appear on the stage of human history and deceive many people with signs and wonders. And if they're too eager for his coming, they might be misled by these counterfeits that bring nothing but destruction. And that's where we read in Matthew 24, 28, where the vultures are gathering over the corpse. And then he points us back to this teaching in Matthew 21 where they curse the fig tree. You might remember that story, but just in the paragraph prior to the one I read this morning, he teaches them the lesson of the fig tree. If the disciples would pay attention, they would recognize the times in which they're living in. Jesus earlier had cursed a fig tree that looked mature, but bore no fruit. It was a picture of the temple and its leaders. It was impressive on the outside, but spiritually barren on the inside. On the outside, they appeared to be righteous. Inwardly, they were corrupt. And what happened to the fig tree would happen to the temple authorities and the temple itself, and all of the corruption and scandal that was perpetrated there. And then we read in verse number 36 that unlike all of the false Christs that would appear on the stage of human history, the coming of the Son of Man would be unmistakable. Matthew 24, verses 29 through 35. But while the coming of Jesus would be unmistakable, it would also be at an hour and a time that was unknowable by any human being. And because the day and the hour of that event is unknown by any human being, regardless of how many books are written by all of the prophecy gurus and how exciting that is to everybody to try and figure out and pin down a date, regardless of that, Jesus exhorts his followers to vigilance. The day is going to come and happen just like any other ordinary day. He says, in fact, it's going to be just like as it was in the days of Noah. People were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage. It'll be like any other ordinary day when the ordinary pursuits of life capture the ordinary time, the hours, the days, and the imagination of the people. Might go back and consider Jesus' reference to Genesis chapter 6 here. He says it's going to be just like it was in the days of Noah when the wickedness of human beings on earth had grown to this great proportion, and the imagination of their hearts was constantly evil. People had become less of a human being than what God intended for them to be. They had become corrupt and lawless, and so conditioned by all of the corruption in society that it had become their normal everyday life, and nobody seemingly cared enough to say or do anything about it. And when we read about Jesus' discourse in Matthew chapter 24, similar attitudes were prevailing at the time. Despite the prediction of the temple, despite the rise of calamity and distress and hardship and the appearance of false Christs who would lead people astray, life is just going on. People are eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage, and because they're not paying attention to what was happening around them, they are overtaken suddenly. Verse 39. And just like it was in the days of Noah, they didn't realize anything was happening until the flood came and took them all away. And Jesus said, so will it be also at the coming of the Son of Man. 2 will be in the field, 1 taken, the other left. 2 women will be grinding at the mill, 1 taken and the other left. This is not a reference to the rapture of the church. It's an illustration of events that would unfold. Jesus is essentially just using a sermon illustration to drive home a point here, a vivid, dramatic illustration of how suddenly things will change for people at an unpredicted time. Everyday life is going to be happening, and then people are going to be completely caught off guard. It's vivid language to express this unexpectedness, this unpredictability of that day of judgment known only to the Father, verse 36. But it would be a day that their generation would experience, Matthew 24:34. People would be living their ordinary lives, and they would be completely caught off guard. That's the price tag of societal apathy towards justice and mercy and fidelity and all of the things that Jesus denounced in the religious leaders of his day in the chapter that preceded the one that we looked at this morning. And so Jesus cautions them against such careless living, and he tells them, stay awake, pay attention. Most of us have mastered the art. I know I did it as a kid. I don't do it so much anymore. My body wakes up at around 4 a.m. every day with or without an alarm clock. I cannot sleep past 3:30, 4 o'clock. I'm up every single day. But when I was a kid, I used to like hitting the snooze button, right? We do it with alarms. We do it with deadlines. We do it with conversations, hard conversations. And sometimes we do it in our spiritual life as well. Matthew chapter 24, Jesus is sounding an alarm, not to frighten his disciples, but to awaken them. This is a generation that is surrounded by corruption and injustice and religious pretense and spiritual numbness. Just kept hitting the snooze button, living as if nothing significant was happening. And Jesus is saying, wake up, pay attention. Don't be caught sleepwalking through this decisive moment. Jesus is not predicting a date for us. It's about cultivating a life that's never asleep to the presence and the purposes of God. The coming of the Lord in this passage is compared with a thief that shows up at a house at an unexpected time of night on a day that's least expected. And the type of alertness that Jesus called his disciples to hold is compared to that zealous homeowner who kept the thief from breaking into the home. The alert homeowner was not passive in the face of injustice and a lack of mercy and corruption and unfaithfulness. He didn't have the luxury of just going about his daily life as if nothing in society were taking place. He had a home and he had a family to keep watch over and keep a thief at bay. My wife often teases me because once my head hits the pillow at night, I'm out. And I sleep so soundly. She can get up 2 or 3, 4 times a night. I don't hear a thing. But one night, we were in the house, and I heard what I thought was just the faint beginning of our home alarm system go off. It hadn't sounded for about a fraction of a second. And I was up out of the bed, gun loaded, round in the chamber, walking down the hall. Just that quick. I had people to protect, and whoever was there was not going to leave in the same condition that they showed up in. I can guarantee you that. Right? Fortunately, it was just the CO2 monitor, the battery was dying or something silly like that. But I was up, I was alert. That's the kind of alertness that Jesus is calling us to pay attention. And the opposite, of course, is a person who's not paying attention to the time in which they're living. All of this stuff is going on around them, and they just pretend like it's not. Like they can't remember what they just saw. Society being led by religious authorities who were corrupt, people who appear to be righteous but full of exploitation, leaders who silenced justice and mercy, who created a culture so normalized in corruption that nobody ever even questions it. But for the one who didn't pay attention, he's like the rest of society, lulled to sleep by the ho-hum of an ordinary day. And through indifference and ignorance and apathy and silence, he winds up participating with the corruption himself. How did that happen? A little bit each day. You ever go to try and start your car in the middle of the winter and the battery's dead? Or in the heat of summer, it's like 120 degrees outside and you go to start your car and it's not going anywhere because the battery's dead? How did that happen? A little bit at a time. It died a little bit each day. It didn't just die suddenly. It died as life was going on as usual. Spiritual life often works the same way. We don't drift into apathy all at once. We drift into apathy from one ignored conviction at a time, one silenced, overlooked concern at a time, one postponed act of faithfulness at a time. That's how we wind up becoming a people who don't care what's going on around us, who are lulled to sleep by the ho-hum of an everyday life. And Jesus is saying, you better stay awake. It's not about predicting a future, it's about preventing this slow spiritual decay and becoming the people that God intended for us. So let me offer you a few things and I'm closing. Miracle, right? It's a quick one today. Just a few things and I'm going to go through them quickly. So number one, what might it look like for us to stay awake today in our times? Well, it might mean to pay attention to the kind of people that we are becoming. Are we cultivating justice, mercy, faithfulness, the very virtues Jesus said the religious leaders of his day neglected and lacked? Or are we so immersed in cultural normalcy that corruption feels ordinary and compassion feels optional? Wakefulness might mean paying attention to the kind of people that we're becoming. Number two, wakefulness means resisting all of the spiritual numbness of business as usual. Notice in the passage, Jesus doesn't condemn eating and drinking and marrying. He's only passing a judgment on the assumption that these good things are the ultimate things. Right? When life becomes crowded with all of the ordinary, the extraordinary presence of God and his purpose, it becomes easy to miss. Number 3, wakefulness might mean to summon the courage to act when corruption or injustice surfaces. Think about that zealous homeowner who was alert when the thief showed up. The passive owner, well, he might have known something was wrong, but didn't want to pay the cost of confronting it. Wakefulness in our time might require holy courage, the willingness to respond or speak or intervene when other people might remain silent. Last one. Wakefulness means living with a sense of joyful expectancy, not anxious speculation. Jesus forbids date setting in this passage not to obscure our hope, but to clarify it. The point is to live ready, not predict the day. Instead of obsessing when he will come, we're invited to be the kind of people he would recognize when he does show up. We're not called to fear the future. We're called to live faithfully awake in this moment.